Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 2021 Healthcare Advocacy Series, co-sponsored by the Tennessee Justice Center and the University of Tennessee at Knoxville College of Nursing. My name is Catherine Crawford, and I am a nurse and doctoral candidate at the University of Tennessee College of Nursing. I will be facilitating today's workshop. Today's session is a media engagement workshop with Dr. Carol R. Myers. This is the third session in our three-part series. The first session was Advocacy 101 with Tennessee Justice Center's Kanika Young, and the second session was the 2021 Healthcare Landscape in Tennessee, which I presented. Our two previous sessions were recorded and can be streamed at tnjustice.org. So a few items to go over this morning before we begin. We are live tweeting today's event with hashtag TNHealth2021. So that's hashtag TNHealth2021. So if you're on the Twitter sphere, we would love to see you post about the event using this hashtag. Let's see, I will be monitoring the chat and we'll capture questions and comments. We'll also be recording today's session and uploading it to the Tennessee Justice Center website for on-demand viewing. Of course, just as a note, the breakout group sessions will not be recorded. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into our workshop. I am honored to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Carol R. Myers. Dr. Myers is a professor in the University of Tennessee College of Nursing, where she teaches graduate level health policy and health services courses and coordinates an interdisciplinary graduate certificate program in health policy. Myers is a leader in the use of policy, advocacy, and media to promote population health, including healthcare access, rural health, Medicaid, and APRN full practice authority. She conducts research that centers on policymaking and health services with an emphasis on access to care, TennCare, public health programs, and advanced practice registered nurses. Myers is the creator and co-host of Health Connections, a radio show on WUOT, the Knoxville NPR affiliate. Myers' blog is an fellow in the American Academy of Nurse Engagement at George Washington University, Association of Colleges of Nursing. Dr. Myers, it is my pleasure to now hand the presentation over to you.
Thank you. The pleasure is all mine, and I want to extend a thank you to all those that have signed down and hope that we're all ready to get working today. This is a workshop. So let me move right on and put together some learner objectives. And this is what I hope that we're able to do today. Let me shrink down this. So we want to look at opportunities for influencing system change by creating a personal brand. But those of you that are representing organizations, you could substitute the word organizational brand and communication strategy, and identify strategies for engaging strategic communication to promote system change. So that's what I hope to accomplish, and we'll check in at the end of the day to see if we were able to do that. So how are we going to do this? I've put together a roadmap, and what we're looking at today is the creation of basic media messages and then selected delivery of those messages. So we're going to focus on three key messages, which is foundational to most communication strategies. And then we are going to apply this through delivery of elevator speech and Twitter. Of course, we could have picked any number of delivery venues, but that's what we'll be doing today. So communication strategies are a powerful way to increase influence, and that's what advocates want to do. That's our business, is to increase our influence to produce change. So we have to learn how to use media strategically. In today's environment, digital media is essential if you want to be a leader and advance policy. So we're going to focus on being at the table, crafting and conveying key messages, about appropriate risk-taking, finding common ground and shared interest, and building your brand and growing your network. Now, today is a beginner's workshop, but that's the directions that we're headed in. Media is the most influential way to sway opinions and ideas that is available to the general public. It's also valuable in getting information, which often is the first step in advocacy. Digital communications, digital media, and interviews are a way to engage the public and get them involved in supporting our goals as advocates. So when nurses and other healthcare professionals and health champions use media, we amp up our power, and power is what we're looking for. And we amp up our ability to lead and influence policy. Okay, now nurses, we hear about all the time that we're the most trusted profession. And I think that also applies to other groups of health professionals. Trust is great, but we want influence. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's look at our agenda. These times are approximate. We'll work at make sure we try to accommodate everybody. We're all at different levels, but we've done our welcome and introductions. We're getting started. We're going to talk just briefly why media engagement. I'm sure some folks said, I don't know why I need that. How you build a personal, or as I said earlier, organizational brand, creation and delivery, and then time for questions and answers and some concluding thoughts. So let's jump right in. Well, before we do that, you'll be able to look at the slide, but before we do that, through the chat, I'm going to ask Catherine to help me. How many of you are direct healthcare professionals? If you'll just indicate in the chat, you can raise your hand or whatever, just so we get a feeling about our composition of folks. Okay, then how many of you, and you can indicate in the chat by words or raising your hand, are academics? How many of you work in a nonprofit where you do advocacy work as part of your organization's mission? Catherine, are you able to get take a pulse here? And then if I've not named the group you're in, please go ahead and put it in the chat, and then Catherine will report out to us, so we just know what we're dealing with. I could be looking at the chat too, Catherine, to help you.
It looks like we're kind of split with clinicians and academics.
Okay, great. Okay, that's good to know.
And a few folks in nonprofits with advocacy work responsibilities.
Okay, so I'm going to encourage you, if you have a question because you feel the content wasn't directed at who you are, or you want to make sure you understand how it applies to who you are, please put those questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to try to look at our broad complement of folks. Okay, so I want to talk about advocacy before I talk about media engagement. And my thing is that I, as an advocate, and I think most of us would come under the rubric of advocating for health equity, because that is so multidimensional, and we all could have careers for our lifetime doing this. This job will never be finished. We'll always have an opportunity. So I think that reducing disparities and addressing social drivers of health and improving health, population health outcomes requires systemic change. So when I talk about the kind of change that I'm engaged in, it's systemic change. And I think as healthcare professionals, we need to be leaders in driving systemic change. And I don't think we can hide from that imperative much longer. So what I want to talk a little bit, just to get us all grounded, it is Saturday morning. So in case someone doesn't have a common definition of disparities, it's just differences between population groups that share similar characteristics. Could be age, could be ethnicity, could be socioeconomic status, geography. I focus a lot on rural health, identity, sexual orientation, and disability. Disparities are often synonymous with the word inequities. But here's the key point. If those differences are modifiable, they are therefore unjust because we allow them to happen when they don't need to happen. So I am focusing in on those disparities that are modifiable. There are some disparities between populations that are not modifiable, maybe genetic characteristics. Now, how as a society we treat people with different genetics is unjust, but having those is not necessarily. So the disparities among US racial groups, ethnic groups, and other minority populations reflect, in my mind, a complex interplay between power and politics. These inequities, in my framework and the reason I do my advocacy, our inequities are caused by power and politics, and they're avoidable. So therefore, that's where my passion comes from. So let's look at the right at the model from the county health rankings, and this will help us understand health inequities a bit more. This is an empirically based model that looks at health outcomes as being evenly split between length of life and quality of life, measurable characteristics. And it looks at what are the drivers of these two outcomes. And I think that most people, most direct healthcare providers that aren't enlightened, and that's many of our people that are providing direct care, would say clinical care is the major driver of health. But as you'll see, it only contributes 20%. Now that matters. Healthcare is necessary, but it's not sufficient. If you want to go in and look at what the major driver of health is, you need to look at social and economic factors. And that's really where most of our attention is directed, because there's an interplay between all of these between all of these drivers of health. And then you can look at health behaviors also being a major contributor, but there's a lot of bleed over between health behaviors and social and economic behaviors, because the choices you make are based on the choices that you have. And then we have our physical environment where people live, work, and play. So I use this framework a lot to try to draw more people into the discussion, because health equity goes far beyond clinical care. We need to look at economic policy, education policy, and all of those things. So that's my framework for what I do, and hopefully might help you with what we're going to do together today. So I have two questions. Again, Catherine, I'm going to ask for your assistance just so we get, again, another pulse point here. How would you rate your experience using media for professional communications? So are you an experienced tweeter or blogger or op-ed writer? Are you inexperienced and that's why you're here? You're wanting to enter this domain. Please use the chat box. And then we'll look at the second question. Let's deal with the first question. And Catherine, you can help summarize once you see the feedback that you're getting.
It looks like everyone is noting novice and inexperienced. And then one participant has some experience, but not proficient.
Okay, well, ask that one participant not to roll their eyes. Sometimes we're going to try to start with a low common denominator, and then we can flex around people's different levels. And then, so I think that if most of them are novices, we know probably the answer to your question about messaging, Twitter, Facebook, op-eds, media interviews. But if people want to provide feedback, again, all of your input is helping us design the breakout sessions we'll be having. So if you'll let Catherine know, why don't you let her know if you have experience with one of these messaging, Twitter, Facebook, op-eds, or media interviews. And thank you for being interactive on Saturday morning.
It looks like we do have a couple of participants who have done some media interviews, and a couple of participants who are who use Facebook, a couple who are using Twitter.
Okay, okay. Okay. All right. Well, thanks. So let's move on to the next slide. So I have a few things to say. Why should we be interested in media engagement? Well, first is, look, you may not be able to read this cartoon, but let me read it to you. Joey, wait, I can't even read it. Catherine, can you read it? Johnny opened the door to the one place he always heard the truth. And look at what the name of that place is, the echo chamber. We have a real problem today in America that people seek out their information from the sources that align with their personal philosophy. We're not very adventuresome or open to hearing things that don't fit our current paradigm. And I see that as a major contributor to some of the partisanship that we have in America today. So let's look at that. So leaders are not getting the ideas and information they need to make good decisions. Next, look at this picture. This picture has a little age on it. It's from 2017, but, and please, you can unmute. I think we're able to accommodate. What do you see when you see this picture? And even if you know some of the players here.
Older white males.
Exactly. Okay. Anybody want to add some other comments to that?
I would say older white males who are making big decisions for the country.
Exactly. Okay. And in this case, these older white males were deciding the fate around the Affordable Care Act when we had the debates in the summer of 2017 about repeal and replacement of the Affordable Care Act. And we know that a lot of population groups have vested interest in certain provisions of the Affordable Care Act, reproductive rights, protection of rights for minority groups, people with different sexual orientations, gender identity, etc. And so here we have this group of senators, including our recently retired Lamar Alexander with the Help Committee, making those decisions. So we know furthermore, when we look at the Wall Street Journal, that at the time the survey was done, which was in 2017, that of the op-eds, 85% were written by white men. That number is slowly changing. But again, one of the things that media can do, and our media engagement, is to enlarge the discussion. And we know that from diversity, we can be able to forge solutions that are more responsive to the society that we live in today. So this is a real problem. And when we're going to talk in a moment about the Woodhull study, which further reinforces this idea that we're only hearing a sliver of the voices, and those voices that we're hearing from tend to be very dominant white male. Okay, so let's look now. This is a nursing related study, and please, my non-nursing participants, in no way is this meant to disenfranchise anyone. It's just a very good, some very good research that we have learned since this study applies to women in medicine and women in other disciplines. But in 1997, the original Woodhull study on nursing in the media found that nurses were cited as sources as only 4% of health stories published by leading national and regional newspapers, and just 1% in the stories in news weeklies. And that would be things like Time and Newsweekly, and 1% in industry publications like Modern Healthcare. That's just astounding to me. 20 years later, when the study was replicated, nurses were used in only 2%. And that difference is not statistically significant or different. And what we found, still only 1% of the industry publications. So in 20 years, from the first Woodhull study to the second, nothing really had changed. Despite the fact that we had major advances in the education of nurses and their leadership, and more independent nurse practitioners that, by nature of that, are generally leaders. So there was, and also in that ensuing time, we had the Future of Nursing report, which was very much calling for nurses to be better represented and better leaders. So we also look at the invisibility of nurses, and that was also extremely low, although there was an increase in the second study. I didn't tell you the origin of this study the first time it was done in 1997. The then editor of USA Today, a woman, had breast cancer. And she had quite a time sick. And as she laid there, she had this revelation: is all these nurses, that's who's taking care of me. That's who I'm relying in my dying days. And yet, why did I have them in my newspaper? So upon her passing, her family funded the first Woodhull study, and then the second study was replicated. So I want to look just at a little bit more from this study. And again, the study's about nurses, but we've heard consistently from particularly women in medicine, that's us too, is we women in general have been underrepresented in newsrooms and in news stories, although there's been some progress because we have groups like the Women's Media Center, of which I'm affiliated. We now have women, SheSource, news experts, etc. This is undoubtedly a factor when you don't have women in the newsroom, why women aren't in the stories. And I think it's real important to look at what this means to us, to any underrepresented group, whether it be women, whether it be people of ethnic minorities, etc., is that we need to get representation in this very public venue. So it moves to my next point, is that media is a powerful tool in shaping public opinion and public policy. And as I've already said, historically, white males, and in our profession in healthcare, physicians have been the predominant health media source. We need to change that, and that's what today's webinar is about. So we have to begin to look at ourselves. The study had a second part that I didn't report to you. We can blame the media, we can blame other folks, but we own some of the blame because we haven't claimed our power. And that's what I want to talk to you about. So I want you to think about, as we begin to look at building our personal brand, is women and other disadvantaged or underrepresented groups sometimes have trouble with the word power. And I want to say, get over it and claim it. Not only get over it, but claim it, because power is how we have influence, and influence is what we need to produce change. So why should you speak up? Trying to balance all these. Why should you speak up? This is a major challenger if you're a researcher, if you're a scholar, or you're a practitioner, is you think the things you do aren't extraordinary, but they are. When you are a nurse who takes care of someone, either when a new life is coming into the world or as someone is leaving the physical world, that is a phenomenal experience. That's not an everyday experience. And you're there to help people on the welcoming and the saying goodbye. You're there to save lives. You're there to help people in some of the hardest parts. And this may be very directly if you're a direct caregiver, or it may be indirectly if you're running a nonprofit or contributing to the work of a nonprofit that looks at health and healthcare, or if you're an academic and doing researcher. So we can speak to the thing that unites all of us around the world, and that's the human experience and the impact of our experiences on our health outcomes. And all of us, everyone on this webinar that comes from diverse backgrounds, have expertise on major topics of broad interest. We just have to identify it and claim it. So ask yourself, what makes me different? Why should people trust me? Am I an authority? Can I back up what I say? Can I contribute to the discussion in new ways? So what? If I'm a researcher and I produce these findings, the first question I have to ask is so what? How is this relevant to the people that I take care of, people in my community, the people in the state where I live? What's the difference between being right and being effective? Now, a lot of times, and I'm going to throw off on academics because we spend so much time around knowledge, we think knowledge is sufficient. It's not. It's necessary, but not sufficient. We have to know how to use that knowledge in a way that is acceptable and accessible to other people. So how will your ideas, this is things I want you to think about as we talk about crafting messages and delivering them, how will your ideas and arguments contribute to the conversation and be helpful to your target audience? And that's something I want you to ask yourself a lot. And Catherine has been a student of mine. I've said that. Who is your target audience? Who are we trying to reach here? Because it's incumbent upon us to adapt to them, not them adapt to us. And then I want you to say, what makes you an expert? Do you have a closer than normal association with the problem we're discussing? Is it because of your educational credentials, special training, personal experience? The webinar that I was on yesterday, we had someone, we were talking about how to use telehealth to treat substance use disorder. And our keynote speaker said, I don't want to be introduced by my educational credentials or my professional affiliation. I want to be introduced as I was an addict and I can talk about what it means. And that was so powerful. So do you have personal experience? Privileged position is something that is really a double-edged sword. Don't use it as a way to place distance, but if you can use it to close the gap between you and other folks, sometimes it is something that we can use to our advantage. And then trust, which I've already mentioned. So I want you to think about building your personal brand. I've already said this, claim it. I've said almost all these things that we just went through. So what I'd like to do now is to look at this schematic as you start to think about building your personal brand, or if you're working, you can substitute organizational. But the first thing you have to do, based on what we just talked about and other things, is take an inventory of your assets. Who are you? What is your niche? When you create your Twitter handle, who do you say you are? You know, it's that simple sometimes. What are your emotional modifiers? Now that's a little bit of a funny word, but what is it that people say is your most important characteristic or what draws them to you? Are you highly organized? Here I am. Are you logical? Are you funny? Some people are very effective in producing change through humor. Are you an extraordinarily caring person and that your messages convey that caring? You know, I can think of folks that I follow on Twitter that maybe because of their position and personal characteristics, caring is written all over their messages. So think about how you affect people and how you make them feel, because that's part of your assets. So how do people benefit from working with you? Do you want to be a go-to source on data? Okay, claim it. How do you want to be described? So you might look at your skills, your credentials. What's your passion? What are your interests? And what are your core values and beliefs? I always say you don't have to say them, you need to show them. You don't have to say them, you need to show them. And what are your personal characteristics, or what I called emotional modifiers? Then we need to begin to construct our brands. And it's important that we stick with key messages. If you're on Twitter and you're commenting on everything, people don't identify you as a go-to person or an authority or someone they want to follow if they don't know who you are, because there's no consistency. You're all over the map. Create content. Oh, we'll talk about that. So what do you want to be known for? What are your goals and what are your key messages? Now, years ago, we had the Commissioner of Health in Tennessee was a nurse, one of my friends and colleagues, Susan Cooper. And it was pretty astounding that we had a nurse as our commissioner of health. It's usually a position held by physicians. And Susan would begin every talk I ever heard her make during her tenure, which I think was about 7 years, is, "I'm Susan Cooper and I'm a nurse." And then she would go on to whatever she had to talk about. So sometimes think about what your personal brand, what do you want people to walk away? You know, we meet someone and we have a conversation and they say, "That was a great conversation." And or even if you go to church and you hear a sermon, "That was great. I really liked it." Well, what did you like about it? And usually people can remember one or two things. So what do you want them to remember about you? Then you need to create authentic content. It's pretty easy to identify the fakes. Well, it should be pretty easy. I think it is. You know, a lot of people are buying into a lot of fakes, but you need to really be deliberate and intentional. Create a communications plan. You know, I've made very deliberate decisions about where I spend my time and how much time I spend on social media. So define your purpose and target audiences. Create a complement of content. You can't be a one-hit wonder. Learn to communicate clearly. We'll talk about that. We're going to talk about capturing the power of stories and then strategically placing content, knowing where to place it and when to place it. And then live your brand. If you take stock of your assets, the connection between taking stocks of your assets and linking with live your brand should be a tight connection. So you want to create a legacy. I will move on to the next slide, and we're going to start talking about creation of messages. But Catherine, are there any questions before we segue from this content? No? Okay.
I don't see any in the chat. Does anyone have any questions? If you do, go ahead and put them in the chat and I will share those with the group. Nope, doesn't look like it, Dr. Myers.
So we're going to move on to a new section here and look about creation of messages. So messaging, if you get messaging right, you're a long ways towards meeting your goals in developing a communication strategy and executing it. It is the foundational media skill. You need short, compelling points. These should be succinct bullet points. Guess what? We're going to write them down. We're going to write them down because this is something that's serious. It's simple, but it's very serious. You need to know your bullet points, and then you need to be prepared to follow up with supporting data. So your bullet points are a hook. You may have a minute or 2 minutes or maybe 3 minutes with a state legislator or a possible funder. And you need to be able to very succinctly deliver whatever your message is, and then be delighted if you get an opportunity to add to that message. But you must get those 3 key points out. So, and you need to understand the reason we communicate usually is to get someone to do something. You want them to maybe listen to your plea for funds, listen to your plea for support or lack of support for a bill before the state legislator, etc. And again, make 3 key points. There's some magic in 3 that about being able to get those across and do that succinctly. So this is what the heart of everything we're going to talk about. And even if we were moving on to more advanced media workshop on interviewing techniques to do effective interviews or writing op-eds, 3 key points is still the heart of everything we do. All right, so as we think about messaging, there's some pretty good research. This is actually a relatively new model, but it's beginning to be validated, is that creating an emotional connection, that someone buys into what you're saying, that either buy in because they've had a similar experience or you've captured their attention, something that matters to them, you've made them feel something. That's what leads to action. So what we do as communicators, we're looking to create targeted content to foster that emotional connection, to create awareness, which, by the way, I forgot to put my arrows here. I see awareness leading to understanding, and then all leading to action. So everything is mediated through this emotional connection, but we may at sometimes be trying to educate people, create awareness about a problem. And then we might wanting to move beyond awareness to a deeper understanding, maybe the roots of the problem or why poverty is such a significant influencer on health, whatever it is. And what we're trying to do is, remember, messaging, the purpose is to get somebody to do something. So that action, but that action and emotional connection are the two strong points here. Okay, I want to talk a little bit now about the power of stories, because I want you to consider stories as we work on messaging today. There's growing evidence, this is meant to be a schematic of the brain and the brain firing up. There's growing evidence that personal stories draw listeners in and create a sense of empathy. Empathy is an emotional connection. Stories are more memorable than facts and figures alone. And why is this? And this is what this graphic is meant to prove, that our brains are wired. Our brains are wired to remember stories. More areas of our brain are active than when we're hearing stories than when we're hearing data or other things. And so stories are being used very effectively. A lot of this research comes from someone from the business school at Stanford, and her thing is around marketing. But I don't think it's a big leap to go from marketing to advocacy, as long as we pull out the points that matter to us, and stories matter. The next thing I'd like to look at, I'm going to tell a story, and there probably are a few folks on the part of the session that have heard me tell this story before. But stories are powerful because they have the tremendous ability to influence and persuade people. They draw them in, make an emotional connection, and then influence and persuade. So this is a poor representation, this picture of the boats, of a story I'm going to tell. I'm sorry, I'm unabashedly a nurse, and I'm passionate about nurse practitioners and other advanced practice nurses in Tennessee being able to practice fully, not because my heart goes to the nurses, because my heart goes to the people who need their care. Okay, so in Minnesota, they had 2 failed years of trying to advance what we call full practice authority, that allow nurse practitioners and others to practice fully, to be able to deliver actually a majority of primary care services. 2 failed years. 3rd year wasn't looking too good. And part of it was because they hadn't come together with common messages. But everything turned, the story I've been told, on the testimony of one nurse. So let me tell you her story. She was a nurse from Minnesota who rode across a lake. You know, there's a lot of lakes in Minnesota. Every week, excuse me, to provide care for a somewhat rural, well, not somewhat, a very rural community that was primarily older citizens. And she did this under Minnesota law, under the supervision of her physician collaborator. And she did everything from drawing blood, doing physical exams, diagnosing, prescribing, bringing medications to folks. And her collaborator, physician collaborator, retired. And that meant the end of her business. She could not find another physician collaborator. And so she went to tell that story that said, and she had pictures of the people she took care of with their permission, and said, how can you deny the care to these people that I've been providing care to for over 20 years because of a law that doesn't protect the people, it protects the turf of the physician. They got full practice authority that year. That story everyone talks about, that moment during the health committee. And we've had a few of those moments here in Tennessee. So stories really matter, but you got to get them short. Mine was a little long. Now, to be successful, and this is infographic I can share with you, that stories must have a goal and a point. Be careful how you use stories, but you need to grab people's attention, engage the listeners, and make sure they're shareable. You don't want a story that only you can tell and no one else can tell. I was watching MASH last night, and there was a joke that different people were telling, and Hawkeye, nobody laughed when he told it, but when BJ, everybody laughed. So part of it is also knowing how to deliver stories. You didn't think you'd hear about MASH today when we're talking about media engagement, I bet. Okay, so here's my favorite saying, data. Most of us live and breathe by data. Data makes us credible. Stories make us memorable. The legislators, who are not experts usually in what you're talking to them about, need to think about how this relates to their constituents, and they need something that grabs their attention. Stories will do this, particularly if it's a story about their constituents. About 4 years ago, I think mine might be off, we were in a dogfight down at the state legislators, the Tennessee Nurses Association with the Tennessee Medical Association. So we lined up 6 nurses to tell stories about the constituents of the legislators who were on the committee. We won that day. We're not winning right now. But anyways, so how do you deliver your key messages? Well, there's a lot of ways to do it. Elevator speeches, Twitter, professional publications, op-eds, media interviews, and others. And I want to speak we'll speak in a minute about elevator speeches. Catherine, what time is it? I don't have the ability of the computer I'm using to see.
Yeah, it's 10:43.
Oh, great. We're doing very well on time. Okay, so in a moment, we are going to break out the group. Catherine's going to assist me, thank goodness, with that. And what we're going to do is I want you to develop an elevator speech or pitch. So what you want to do is first we'll take 10 minutes just all together, but working individually, to work on your 3 key messages. And then we're going to put you in breakout rooms and pair you with someone. You go to the breakout room and pick who, and you can even, you want to practice your elevator speech. Or you can do it all within your group. You know, one person do it and the others look. And what you're doing is you're incorporating your 3 messages, and then within your breakout group, offer feedback to each other. So now that I think about it, I don't know that pairing up versus just moving around the circle of the breakout group. And you might want to record the speeches, because sometimes we think we did fabulous, and then we look at a recording and we go, oh no. Now, elevator speeches. I have a story to tell you. I had a graduate student, not from nursing, from public health, who bravely decided she wanted to go to Nashville with me to do some work, meeting with some legislators. We were working on issues related to gun violence at that time. And she was brave enough to say she wanted to ride with me, which meant she was captured in the car for 3.5 hours with her faculty person for the course she was taking. I told her she was very brave to do that. And what we did was we talked about who we were going to meet with and what we were going to say. And I said, do you have your elevator speech ready? Oh yeah, I've been paying attention. I've got my elevator speech ready and I'm ready to go. I've got it wired. I've wrote it down. I practiced it in front of the mirror. I said, great. So as soon as we got to Legislative Plaza, we needed to use the restroom. And we came out of the restroom, walked down the hall to go meet with the legislators. And we got into the elevator, and one of the legislators on the committee where our bill was going to be heard was in the elevator. And I elbowed her and I said, elevator speech. And she looked at me like I was talking Greek or something. And I said, we have 1 floor, get with it. She never said a word. And when we got out of the elevator, the legislator left hurriedly. I said, what about your elevator speech? I mean, this doesn't happen so often that your elevator speech is actually in the elevator, but it's designed for 1 floor. And she goes, I had no idea that's what it was. So always be ready and take advantage of the opportunity. So what I'm going to ask you now for 10 minutes, and again, Catherine, I don't have my phone to time this, work on your 3 key messages. Let me give you an example. If I was talking about full practice authority, again, there she goes again. I might say, a large number of Tennesseans, particularly in rural areas, do not have adequate access to care. Across the country, in other states, nurse practitioners are effectively delivering needed primary care more cost effectively and at the same or better outcomes. My third point would be, therefore, we need to change the Tennessee state laws. So those are my three key points. And in this case, it follows what we often do in policy, which is define the problem, amplify the problem and offer solutions, and then do a call to action. So I want you to think about, what is it that floats your boat? If you today had an opportunity to influence a change, or to talk about a change, or get change on the agenda, what is it that you're interested in? And for those three, for whatever it is, please draft your key messages, succinct bullet points, write them down, and then after 10 minutes, we'll put you in breakout groups where you will practice delivering those key messages. So Catherine, will you help me with timing 10 minutes, please?
Sure. And Dr. Myers, can you restate those 3 points? So define the problem.
All right, yeah, let me
Amplify the message with.
Well, that's just one way. Mine was define the problem, amplify the problem and or offer a solution, and then a call to action. What do you want people to do?
Okay, great.
But that's not the only way. Your key messages could be different. It depends on, again, what's your purpose and who is your target audience. For some of you, you may be educating folks. You might be highlighting a problem and offering the most salient points to get people interested, and then offering more information. That's another schema. It's not always the same. What are you trying to do and who are you trying to influence? So I gave you an advocacy example. Is that good, Catherine?
$10 minutes on my timer.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead and start. Okay.
Thanks. That you were working on your 3 key messages and working among yourself, and that doesn't always happen. So kudos to you about that. Now we're going to move into a new section of our presentation. And we're going to start to talk about social media. And why do we want to talk about social media? Well, it does give you access to up-to-date information. It's real time. It lets you stay in contact with colleagues and leaders in your area of interest, and you can exchange ideas and engage in conversations. But a few cautions. It takes time and work. I consider it as an investment to build and sustain a media presence, but I have to put some brakes on sometimes and some boundaries. And please do not believe everything you read, and be ready for the inevitable harassment that you might get for a tweet that someone doesn't agree with. Unfortunately, there's sometimes a marked lack of civility in our public discussions. Among social networking, Facebook is the most popular social networking site, although it's taken some pretty severe hits lately. But 75% of internet users have a Facebook account. That was at the time I looked these statistics up, which was prior to 2020. 70% of those that have Facebook access the site daily, and the users tend to be more mature. Now, initially, I know I got on Facebook so I could see pictures of my grandchildren because that's where my son was, but now the younger people have migrated away. And it's used for both personal and professional purposes, and I'll say more about that later. Twitter, which is what we will talk about today, does have a lower number of users. The interaction tends to be more in real time, and it's a lot more used for professional communication than personal. And I try to keep those separate. I do use Facebook, but I use it for personal. I post pictures of the mountains, my grandkids, talk about my garden, talk about hikes, but I do not do professional work on Facebook, but I do on Twitter. Some of you might use Instagram. I'm not a user, but it's really popular among younger adults. And I see more and more of my colleagues who aren't younger adults usually that are linking Instagram and Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And then of course we have other things like Snapchat. But I'm going to make the case, at least for today's webinar, why to use Twitter. So I'm going to say first that 50 million tweets are posted every minute. 50 million tweets per minute. It's one of a dozen media platforms, and we know that the reason we've seen this proliferation of these platforms is because of Web 2.0, which allows everyone to post content. It was a real breakthrough, and so now use of the internet is ubiquitous because of Web 2.0. At the same time, it has changed the world, and I want to share this picture. Does anyone know what this picture is? It's the Arab Spring. An Arab Spring uprising was fueled by Twitter. How about the next picture that I posted? Does anyone know what this one is? This was just over 4 years ago, and it's the Women's March on Washington. So some of this stuff's getting to be pretty old in Twitter word. And this third picture that I'm posting are the high schoolers from the high school in Florida. Oh gosh, I've drawn Stoneman. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name, but their presence on Twitter has persisted and they've done very well. So Twitter and other forms of social media are used by everyday citizens, celebrities. Hey, I follow Dolly Parton. And guess what? Actor follows me. I forgot his name now. We have policymakers, many of our Tennessee state legislators, federal policymakers. We have scholars, and we have other leaders on Twitter and other forms of social media. Now, social media has gotten a bad rap, and there's documented negative impact on our well-being. That's something you need to be cautious about and manage. But there is no denying the pervasiveness of Twitter. It is a giant megaphone that can be used to promote or negate, amplify or denigrate. I personally use Twitter to raise awareness about problems related to health and healthcare, to promote policy solutions, engage in grassroots advocacy, and it's wonderful for that purpose, and to connect with stakeholders. So I'm going to talk to you about what the 4 C's of tweeting and a way for you to conceptualize how you might use Twitter. The first C is curate. Find things on Twitter that inspire you, make you think, or that might be useful to colleagues or students. In my case, tie these to your scholarship and then tweet them out, so that you're not creating the content, you're taking someone else's content and you're retweeting it, maybe adding a little comment and to connect it to your work. So that's one thing. I'm going to show you some examples in a few minutes. Then the next thing you can use Twitter for is to connect. So you can engage in conversations and dialogue with folks you know or folks who follow you. You can participate in Twitter chats. I've been doing that more and more on a topic related to your scholarship. We have nurse practitioner tweets. We have tweets of people that are interested in promoting a certain political candidate. We have tweets that are people that are interested in rural healthcare, where people come together and respond usually to questions posted by the leader. But sometimes it's more free form, but Twitter chats I'm finding to be more and more helpful. And sometimes I go back and look at the archives of those. You can connect with your colleagues on Twitter by following them. Yesterday, I wrote a note to someone And I wrote as if I knew them, but I realized I only knew them on Twitter. I'd never met them face to face. But it is a great way to make connections that you wouldn't otherwise make. And it's been so important during the pandemic, at least for me. We can use Twitter to collaborate, to highlight your collaborations in teaching, writing, presentation, service. So you tag your colleagues. But also, I want to tell you that it has some unfound opportunities. I've said a couple times I'm interested in rural healthcare, and I curated a post about rural healthcare, and a rural healthcare researcher from University of Alabama in Birmingham contacted me about collaborating on a manuscript. And I thought that was pretty cool. And not too long ago, I tweeted about one of my radio shows, and a physician in this community that I live in that I did not know, said, "This is a passion of mine. When can we have coffee and talk about this?" And so we had a virtual coffee because it is the pandemic. And I think there's some opportunities for he and I to work together. So in my world, collaboration, scholarly collaboration is very important. And then in the advocacy work I do, the more people we have moving towards a common direction, the more powerful we are. And then lastly, and maybe a little harder for some people in some regards, is generating new content with your tweets. And maybe it's related to your scholarship, and you tweet about a new paper you just published. A couple of weeks ago, I had a guest editorial on a subject that was near and dear to my heart, and that is health inequities and how we as nurses need to change social situations or address what we call social determinants or drivers of health rather than just meet social needs. Again, you hear me say this phrase a lot. Meeting social needs is necessary. All of us need to help the person that comes into our agency or is under our care, whatever, but we have to go further upstream and change the situations that made them have to come in and be in need. So I used Twitter, and I got tremendous amount of reaction, and not just in North America, about that op-ed. So I had created content and I used Twitter to promote it. So, share a bit about yourself, who you are, and you might find new friends. So what I'm going to do next is just share some tweets and just offer you some observation. These are old tweets of mine. They're several years old, but they illustrate points. So it's less about the tweets than it is about the points that I'm trying to make. So let's look first. I have to keep moving things around. Jennifer Jackson, I've come to know, is a nurse activist from Canada. And she says the most exciting innovation in nursing is nursing owning and talking about its expertise. We're finally moving beyond the caring and compassion narrative. We don't ever want to forget it, but we're moving further along to talk about nurses and patient safety, equality, social justice, expertise, and more. And then she tags this, which we'll talk about, this nursing now as a tag. So let's look then what happened with this tweet. Well, here is the group of, these are gerontology nurses, and they reply back to Nurse Jackson. "We love what you're saying. We were wondering if you know of any nurses doing nursing communication or nursing journalism. We have science communicators to translate expertise. Why not nursing?" And so then she kept the Nursing Now, which is an international initiative, and Voice of the Future. So she gave a new tag. So then Carol Myers jumps in here. Remember, I have been committed to media engagement for a long time, and I work with the George Washington Center for Health Policy and Media Engagement, where I'm a senior fellow. And I said, well, guess what? GW, our Center for Health Policy and Media Engagement, does media training. People ask for a resource. Here's the resource. You might want to consider this. And then I tagged the people and our blog site, HealthCetra, that's part of our Center for Health Policy and Media Engagement. So then we get a reply from the Gerontology Association of, I don't know what those initials mean. "Thank you, this is fantastic. We will be sharing with our members and leadership." So look at that series of 3 tweets, how a nurse in Canada, then gerontology nurses happened to be meeting, and then I saw it and I responded, and then we have a connection made. I think that's pretty phenomenal. So then I can't remember. So then I amplified that again. So let's look to the next series. So there's no one way to do it. I'm just showing you examples, and by no means am I holding them up as perfect, but you don't have to be perfect. You're better to be engaged and not perfect than not engaged, okay? So then I wanted to lift up one of my colleagues, and by lifting up my colleagues, I hope I'm lifting up the whole profession. So Dr. Lisa Eichenberg is down at Georgia, and she had gotten an award down here, and she was working with she was working on a bill, successfully working. So I go in and congratulate her. I say she's an exemplary nurse leader, because we got to keep getting that word out there, whether it's nurse leader, social work leader, pharmacist leader, that we are leaders, not just the top dogs. And then I wanted to highlight that she was an advanced practice registered nurse, because that matters to me. You find what matters to you. And then I tagged it with a catchy phrase, nurses lead, and then also full practice authority. You're probably getting tired of me hearing that, except maybe Carla and Marcia. So then I have another one where I want to highlight work of some of my colleagues. We all like to get lifted up, but when we lift up others, we lift up everyone. So I said that the Tennessee CRNAs, so nurse anesthetists, rock, and they're essential to providing high quality, cost-effective care. And I tag one of my colleagues who happens to be on the faculty at UT, as well as being a practicing CRNA. The lobbyist for the Tennessee Association of Nurse Anesthetists is one of the very best lobbyists I've ever known, is a close colleague, Tasha Alexander. I tagged her, and I don't remember who. Oh, Mountain Man is a CRNA I know that's been involved in helping us. So the CRNAs were spending the day, it was their day on the Hill. And I wanted to make sure people knew that the CRNAs were all over our state capital, and that they're our nursing colleagues, and we have common purpose. Okay, so now we're going to talk about getting started on Twitter. Let me get caught up with myself here. So I hope that some of you, if not all of you, set up a Twitter account if you didn't have one. It's not uncommon for folks to have a Twitter account. Maybe they don't use it, or they use it only as a lurker, which means that you don't post, but you look, and that's okay. Now, if that's all you ever do, that's okay. But I hope that you'll start to consider posting. So if you didn't set up your account, one of us can go in and give you a link, or you can Google how to set up. Twitter has very easy instructions. We sent them out to you, but you need to know in advance your name, your email, and your password. But your username, which represents your personal or organizational brand, is so important. So maybe you set your account up and now you think Beach Girl isn't exactly the professional name that you want to give yourself. In my case, I'm TN Policy Nurse, because that's what I want to be known for, and that's what I do, and that's what I use Twitter for. And then you can go in and do your settings and your profile. So could you, in the chat box, let Catherine know if you've not set up a Twitter account and you need assistance? Otherwise, when we break out, you can do that in the breakout. But if you need any assistance, you can post it, and you can do it privately if you don't want everyone to know. That is fine with me. But I want everyone to have a Twitter account that they can use for when we break out and we practice with Twitter a little bit. Okay, so there are some tips and techniques. Again, very beginner oriented right now. But one of the things you're going to want to do that should be a priority for you is to grow your network, because the more people in your network, the more tweets you're going to see from more different people, and the more people that are going to see your tweets. Okay, so maybe we can locate that link to Twitter and post it in the chat box when we break out. One of the ways that I can't look at all the tweets that I get in a day, I follow too many people, people follow me. So sometimes I want to know something in specific. I might want to know what's being said about the 10 Care 3 block grant or just the block grant. So I might use hashtags to search on, or I'll use hashtags in my tweet so that other people that are interested in that conversation. So hashtags are just that, it's a tag on content so other people can look it up. When you're doing a tweet that you think relates to someone else, either they're the authority or you want to grab them into the discussion or whatever, tag them. If they're on Twitter, you tag them by using the @ and whatever their Twitter handle is. My Twitter handle, Tennessee Policy Nurse. And then you also can do direct messages. So let's look at a tweet where I tagged some people and I used hashtags. So I, for a while, was working a lot on social isolation. And I wrote sharp decline in social connectedness the past 20 years. The health consequences of social isolation are severe. So I'm educating people. I'm curating information. But then I'm promoting my radio show. Next episode of Health Connections, my co-host, the wonderfully esteemed Brandon Hollingsworth, and I will discuss the impact, causes, and possible solutions. You see something there? A pattern of 3. The impact, the causes, and the possible solutions for social isolation. And then I'm trying to get people to listen to the radio show. But I already put some 3 key points out there. I've offered some education. I've highlighted my co-host. I tagged him and I used some hashtags. I always hashtag my radio show because listeners, tweets, all those things are how my success is measured. Okay, so let's see what is next. And you'll learn these things, but what we're going to do next is we're not going to work in partnership. As a matter of fact, I'm not even positive we need to break out. Let me think on my feet real quick here. I don't think we need to go into breakout groups. All I want you to do is to create 2 to 3 tweets. And I want you can create them about our workshop. And please remember that the hashtag that was announced to you when we started this webinar was TN, both are capped, health with H capitalized 2021. So hashtag TN health, okay, 2021. And you would like to tag this. So I want you to work and come up with a couple tweets. If you want some help getting set up, and one person asked, we'll get you the link and I can work with you if we need to break out. Catherine's available too. And then I want you, and if you want someone to look at your tweets, before you send them, but now is the time to do some tweets. Okay, so we're going to spend about 20 minutes. Please I'll start checking the chat. Please send messages to Catherine and I if you need individual help or you need a resource, and we will work with you. Carla, I'm going to look up that link in a minute. I'll have to go off share screen. Oh, no, Catherine already did.
Yep. And then Kanika shared a link to like a help page for Twitter.
Perfect.
So if you go to that twitter.com page, it'll just say sign up and you can set up an account pretty easily right there. But if you'd like a step-by-step instructional page, you can go to that other link.
Okay, and another thing we can do, we're going to try to, we have a small group, which is wonderful. We've been able to do some things we wouldn't have done. If you have a question or you want to read a tweet to the group, just unmute yourself. Just don't talk over each other, but rather than breaking out, we can modify what we're doing. And that's always the sign of people that are successful, is they're adaptable and fit the situation. So if you've got a tweet and you want to share it with the group, please do that. But we will also be looking on Twitter for your tweets.
Dr. Myers, do you have any advice? You have a really great consistent presence on Twitter. Do you have any advice for folks who are looking to maintain a consistent presence, you know, with all sorts of competing priorities in life?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I will try to answer that question, but each person has to answer it. But Twitter is a real-time platform. So when you first start Twitter and you don't have many followers and you're not following many people, you could read all the tweets that came in that day to you. But as you grow your network, you can't. And what I say is I'm going to allow myself a set amount of time. I am a big proponent of the Pomodoro method. I use one of those little tomato timers and say, when this rings, I'm done. I'm done because I've got a life. I've got relationships, real life relationships, not just Twitter ones I want to maintain. So I'll go in for a set amount of time. It might be 30 minutes. Sometimes it's an hour. And I might start at the top, the most recent tweets, and read down. Or I might be interested in what the heck is going on with the Medicaid block grant. So I might look for the hashtag Medicaid block grant, or I might look for certain organizations that I know are curating content. So this morning, I looked at the Tennessee Justice Center. I looked at the Tennessee Healthcare Campaign, or I might want to look at a person. I'm enjoying so much the personal journey of a gentleman named Andy Slavitt. He worked in the Obama administration in CMS, has been out running the group called United States of Health, a very strong national advocacy group. And now he's back in the federal government working in the Biden administration. And he's one of the best tweeters I know. So last night I read Andy's tweets from this week just to mark this special time of transition. So those are some strategies that you can use. You can use what we talked about, be a lurker and say, you know, today I just don't feel like putting anything up. But if you want to do tweets, I try to plan them. And there's a couple things about planning your tweets. There's software that you can use. I do not, but I might say, I'm going to write this tweet and I'm going to post it 4 times today at different times. Because remember, it's real time. So if someone's not looking at Twitter in the morning and you only post it in the morning and you don't post in the evening when they're looking. So I try to do that. And I lost my train of thought. So, you know, I try to be strategic and I try not to just retweet. That looks a little tacky. That kind of looks like lazy if you just retweet your own tweets. So I copy them and paste them. And I actually keep a Word document open where if I get an inspiring thought or something I want to tweet, I put it in Word and then later on clean it up before I put it on Twitter. But also, please know, I'm a perfectionist. You don't need to do that. But I look to make sure, is this message still important 2 hours later? Because I want to avoid doing something that is not thought through. Okay, just to let you know. So managing your time, you know, just looking at the most recent tweets. You can look at trends, you can look at people you follow, and you can look at subjects you follow through the hashtags. I use Twitter more during the week and Facebook more on the weekend because sometimes we got to get away from it. Okay, so what happens, which is a phenomenon that's going on now, and actually some of my colleagues did a workshop yesterday. You post something on Twitter and you get attacked. I mean, viciously. Several years ago, I put a campaign sign in my yard for who was voted as the most liberal Republican state senator in Tennessee. Remember, I said Republican, but he was, because he was moderate, he was pegged liberal. And I went in and said, thank God for moderates and people from the silent middle. Oh my God. I personally hate snakes, and I was getting pictures on Twitter of all these really ugly green snakes. And then the message was, we know where you live. And then the next message was, go outside. And the campaign sign I had put in my front yard was gone. So I called the sheriff. Recently, I'll tell this one too. I served on the ANA task force that made the recommendation that was eventually approved that they quit endorsing political candidates. And when that became a firestorm this year, I got personally attacked by folks I thought were close colleagues. And it wasn't professional attacks or arguing the points. It was personal attacks about my integrity, my intelligence, etc. And what I found, just get out of the conversation. You cannot, with certain people, defend yourself. It just gives them fodder for more. So be careful how you post things. I try to post things, I don't curse. I try not to attack people. I try to look for the positive, even when I'm saying that Medicaid block grant is not the same as expansion. Find a way to say that that's not adversarial. So anyways, Catherine, there's a request for you to break out with Carla. If you would do that and help Carla, because we need to unleash the beast. We need to get Carla tweeting. Is there anyone else that requested anything? But why don't I be quiet and let people work on their tweets? So Catherine, do you need help or do you want me to do it? You good?
I'm doing it right now. Yep.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about network and relationship and just a little, bear with me here a second. I'm just going to go ahead and put the two graphics up and share the comments that I want to make. Connections to people that we know only peripherally in some ways are more important than connections to people we know very well. Because what we're trying to do is extend our network and have influence where we don't currently have influence. Weak ties, those ties that are further and further away from our center, provide access to new networks, new information, and new ideas. So these weak ties, ties that are peripheral, actually are the most impactful. The more diverse your networks are, so consider that when you're following people or you accept people to follow you, you get more innovative ideas. You get ideas that challenge your ideas and maybe help you rethink your ideas. There's nothing I just can't see anything wrong with ever examining our ideas to see if we've got it right, because things change, we learn new things, we have new experiences, and we can benefit from those things from other people, their new ideas, their new experiences, etc. And so here's my final statement in regards to this. To lead and advance policy, we need diverse networks that include ties to experts and influential people, but also all of the other stakeholders. And I'll give an example. Last Saturday, I was sitting in this very same seat, almost this time. We did a webinar through the Tennessee Healthcare Campaign, which is another advocacy group that I think you would find interesting to follow. But we've been talking Medicaid expansion since the Affordable Care Act was enacted in 2010, and we've not gotten much traction in our state. So my premise to them was, we need to change the conversation, we need to face our reality, and we need to change who we're talking to. And Carla, I would say the same thing is true around full practice authority, and we could talk about that separately. So we had a webinar last week where we brought in new ideas rather than talking about inequities between groups, which are so important, but that had been covered in a prior webinar, or rather talking about how we win the hearts and minds of the legislators. We said, how do we win the hearts and minds of business people who are a very powerful lobby in Tennessee? How do we win the hearts and minds of local local policymakers, county governor, county mayors, municipal mayors, etc. And we decided that emphasizing the health-wealth connection, that health in of itself is important, which has been our long message, but health as a driver of the economy is another argument. and likewise wealth as a driver of health. So we spent a lot of time with some experts that know a lot about this, talking about what does the evidence show us and how do we translate this into messages that we can share with different people, change the conversation, start talking about health and wealth, and change who we're talking to. So that all has to do with this concept of networks and relationships. So as you build your Twitter network, as you extend your influence, be mindful of these weak networks in what I oftentimes also call, we know who the usual suspects are. We're usual suspects. Most everyone that is here today, it's easy to see why they're here. Well, who are the unusual suspects? Who should we maybe have had here, or when we start talking about a specific policy issue that's not here? So that's why I brought up networks and relationships. So I am going to open it up to questions, and then I think Catherine and or Kanika will close things out with whatever they have to say. But please, if you have a question, just unmute. No need to use chat. As a matter of fact, I'm going to get out of I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other. And
We've got Carla successfully on Twitter now. So
I
I've
saw.
been seeing lots of tweets regarding the workshop today and using the hashtag TN Health 2021. So that's great to see.
Okay. Anybody have a question? Or with this group, and as well as we've done, we will also accept comments. Sometimes it's dangerous to do that, but I feel comfortable with this group. Well, we'll give it a minute more, and if not, Catherine and Kanika, anything you'd like to wrap up with?
Sure. Well, I would just like to thank everyone for spending their Saturday with us. I would like to remind everyone of the previous 2 sessions that we had in our 3-session series. You can go to tnjustice.org to download those or to stream them on demand. I would, of course, like to thank Dr. Carol Myers for leading us in our workshop this morning. It was excellent, and I know I'm leaving very inspired to go out there and really fine-tune my 3 messages and engage in social media. Does anyone have any final questions?
Are there evaluations, Catherine?
Yes. So we're going to be sending out a survey later, and it will also open up if you're interested in any other topics, so that we could continue on in the advocacy series. So we will certainly send out a survey through email to all registrants.
Can I plant a seed?
Sure.
I was a big gardener, but the seed I'd like to plant is a very effective tool. If I was to go to my next go-to tool, are op-eds. So if that's something we can generate interest, we may, no promises, but it's something, if we knew there was interest, we might look at for sometime later in the year. And it would be also a workshop where you would have to come ready with the topic, and we'd start working on getting an op-ed done.
Yes, and I can just take a quick pulse on interest in an op-ed workshop. If you'd like to just go ahead and use the raising hand reaction tool there, and I can take a peek. Oh yes, we've got some hands up, thumbs up. Yes, so it sounds like out of this group, we've got a lot of interest in an op-ed workshop.
Okay, so we can, again, I'm not sure how this will do, but I always plant seeds wherever I go. Anything else, anyone I had my email address there. Let me put it in the chat box if anyone has any questions, okay?
Okay.
I see that my last message,